Hello, and welcome to Best Picture, Worst Critic, the podcast where we watch every single winner of the Oscar for Best Picture since the beginning of the Academy Awards way back in 1929. I'm your host, Jesse Nguyen, and I am that critic. Today, we'll be talking about Wings, which is, of course, the very first winner of the Oscar for Best Picture. Now, that award was originally called Outstanding Picture back in 1929, but eventually became what we now know as Best Picture. Wings was the only fully silent film to ever win Best Picture, although during my research I discovered that another film, released much more recently, could be argued to be a silent film. That film is The Artist from 2011, which was in the style of a silent film. But if we're talking about truly silent films, Wings holds that sole distinction. The version of Wings that I'll be watching is a later release that included synchronized sound in the form of music and some sound effects. Another fun fact about Wings is that it was considered a lost film for many years until a print was discovered in the Cinémathèque Française in Paris. Please excuse my French. And Wings was extremely innovative at the time. Most of the flying that you see in the film is genuine. The director, William A. Wellman, and Richard Arlen, who plays David in the film, both had real-life flight experience from World War I, which really lent itself to the authenticity of the film. Buddy Rogers, who plays Jack, did not have prior flight experience, but he learned to fly just for Wings. They also created custom mounts for the cameras so that they could be attached to the planes. This made for some really cool, really dynamic shots in the film. And they also built 100-foot towers to be able to get some of the shots. Additionally, with this being a World War I film, they enlisted the help of the U.S. Army Air Corps, including hundreds of pilots and extras, as well as thousands of infantry for the big battlefield scenes. Now, as for the cast, there are probably a couple of names that you've heard of already. Clara Bow, one of the biggest names at the time, stars as Mary Preston. Bow was Paramount's biggest star, so she could definitely sell tickets on name recognition alone. Wings also features Gary Cooper, another massive icon in cinema history, but this role was actually before he was super famous. In fact, he only appears for like 5 minutes, which we'll get into later. Clara Bow didn't actually really enjoy this role. She felt like Wings was a guy's film and that she, in her own words, was just the whipped cream on top of the pie. And she also wasn't a fan of her costuming. She apparently modified her own costumes by cutting off the sleeves and slitting the necklines. I don't know if this was because she thought the costumes were too modest or what, but I guess the costume designer wasn't too happy about that. There were also a lot of on-set antics involving the cast and crew during production. Clara Bow, who had just recently gotten engaged, openly flirted with a lot of the men on set and even had an affair with Gary Cooper. And a lot of the men also got up to their own trouble while filming. There's a rumor that at the hotel that the cast and crew were staying at, all of the elevator girls were pregnant by the time filming wrapped, which is just insane to me. I'm sure that kind of stuff still goes on to an extent today, but the pervasiveness with which that occurred back then, it just blows my mind. So back to the movie itself. First with a synopsis of the movie. 2 young men, one rich, one middle class, both in love with the same woman, become U.S. Air Corps fighter pilots and eventually heroic flying aces during World War I. Devoted best friends, their mutual love of the girl eventually threatens their bond. Meanwhile, a hometown girl who's the love-struck lifelong next-door neighbor of one of them pines away. Okay, so starting up the movie, I cue it up and it starts playing, but the screen is all black. But I do hear the music starting to play. And at first I actually thought that maybe something was wrong with my copy of the movie, but after a little while the video did come in, so just kind of an awkward start to the movie. I don't know if it was like that in the theaters or what, but just a little weird. But then you see the Paramount Pictures production logo. So that comes up, and then it starts to transition to an older one, and then an even older one, and then it just keeps going back through time, going through all of the older iterations of the Paramount logo, all the way until we get back to what I'm assuming is the original one, or at least the one that was being used in 1927. Super cool effect, in my opinion. And then it also got me wondering if that mountain in the logo is real and if it's been the same mountain forever. Turns out it's not a real mountain, it's just a painting of one, but it's been pretty much the same mountain forever. So the movie gets going, and then the music, starts to ramp up, and it's really marchy, very military, very appropriate for World War One. And then there's also a subtitle card that comes up dedicating the movie to all of the fallen pilots from World War One. And then right off the bat, we're introduced to Jack Powell, played by Buddy Rogers. He's lying on the ground and he rolls onto his back, then does this really weird stretch where his legs like go all the way up to his head for some reason. I don't know. It's just a crazy way to stretch. I've never stretched like that. I don't know if you have, but it just looked a little goofy, very cheesy. Anyway, he's smiling and looking up at the sky, and it's here where we learn that Jack's dream is to fly. He wants to become a pilot. Then next, we're introduced to Mary Preston, who is played by Clara Bow. And we're told that Jack had saved Mary from a fire at some point, and for this reason, she's just completely in love with him. It's so obvious that she is just head over heels for this guy. So she's like doing the laundry or something, and he's starting to work on a car. So she goes over and starts talking to him, just starts bothering him essentially while he's working on this car. And in classic fashion, she's getting in the way. He's like trying to move around her, that kind of thing. And they're talking a little bit, but I can't make out a word of it because remember, this is a silent film. And so you don't hear the dialogue. And then finally we do get a subtitle card with some speech on it. And it's Jack saying, "Gee, can't you let a man work in peace?" And it's going to be like this for the whole movie. And at this point, I'm thinking like, oh man, okay, so I'm going to have to do a lot of reading of body language. They're going to be exaggerating all of their movements and their facial expressions to really get across what their characters are feeling and what their characters are saying. It's not like today, obviously, where we can hear what they're saying in most movies. And so at this point, I was like, okay, I'm going to need to lock in for this to really get what's going on. So anyway, Mary's trying to help, keeps getting in the way, and then we cut to just like we have a small little time jump to the next day, I'm assuming, where Jack's changed clothes. He was wearing like a mechanic's uniform, and then now he's switched into rather nice clothes for working on a car. Like I wouldn't dress like that to work on a car. I wouldn't want to get grease on it. It's like trousers and then like a sweater or something. So they're working on this car together, Jack and Mary, and Jack's real excited about these speed gears that he's put into the car. And he's like, man, with these new speed gears, this thing's going to drive like a shooting star. And then they talk about it a little bit and they end up naming the car the Shooting Star. And Mary gets a paintbrush and then she paints, a little cartoonish depiction of a shooting star, with the star, and then it's got the trails behind it. It's kind of like the More You Know, that logo with the star with the trail, flying behind it. So she paints this on the car, and Jack smiles, and he seems to be into it. And it's also kind of at this point that I, as the viewer, am starting to realize, man, the video quality on this movie is actually really good for a movie that's almost 100 years old. I'm thinking, like, I've always heard people say that film, like actual film, has really good quality. And so I'm thinking, maybe that's it, because they shot this on real film, and real film preserves a lot of quality. As long as you have the original film, you can get a lot of quality out of it. So I'm assuming that's what this is. And I'm also sure that this was the version I'm watching was remastered for, modern TVs and modern audiences and all that. But it just really blew me away how good the video looked. So they continue working on this car, and Jack tries to move around Mary. He bumps into her, and then she kind of plays up this whole, like, when you have like a celebrity who touches you or something, or touches your clothing, and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm never gonna wash this shirt ever again. That's exactly what she does. So Jack like bumps into her or something, and then she clutches her shirt, and she's like, oh my god, I'm never gonna wash this shirt. I can't believe Jack touched my shirt. Oh my god. And it's just really goofy, pretty humorous, and it's just so obvious that Mary is in love with Jack. And that's furthered by the next scene where they're looking at the shooting star on the side of the car, and Mary goes, you know what you can do when you see a shooting star? And Jack's like, no, what? And Mary's like, you can kiss the girl that you're in love with. And then Jack's like, you know what? Maybe I will. And Mary is just, I don't know. She's just clueless, I think. Doesn't realize that Jack's really not into it. So she starts trying to straighten out her clothes, clean up her hair a little bit, just get a little bit nicer for Jack because she thinks he's going to kiss her. And then he like gets in the car and just drives off, just leaving Mary there. He just drives off. And then also this car that he's working on, it's not done. It is not safe. It's the 20s, so I don't think cars were safe to begin with, but like this especially, he's just sitting on a chair driving this thing. There's no walls or doors or anything. Like you could easily fall out of this thing. It's just crazy. Most dangerous looking skeleton of a car I've ever seen in my life. So then we cut to a couple of new characters. We have Sylvia Lewis, and we get a subtitle card saying that Sylvia has an advantage over the other small town girls because she's actually a visitor from the city. And the way they styled Sylvia in this movie, I don't know if they did this on purpose or what, or if this was a genuine difference between city girls and small town girls back in the 20s. But she looks wildly different from Mary. She has long, wavy, flowing hair. She's wearing like an all white, almost like a sleeping gown, very ethereal clothing. If you're familiar with paintings from the artist Alphonse Mucha, she looks like one of his paintings. It's just completely different from Mary because Mary's wearing, all American. She's got like a skirt on and a sweater, and she's got like a short bob kind of hairstyle. And then Sylvia, all of this long flowing stuff, just complete opposites. So she's sitting on a swing with David Armstrong, who is played by Richard Arlen. And we're told that David Armstrong also has an advantage over the other small town boys. He's from the wealthiest family in town. So they're sitting on this swing together and they're swinging back and forth. And David looks like he hates his life, but I don't think that's what he was actually feeling. I think he's really just kind of zoned out. He's just enjoying the moment. He's just at peace. So Jack pulls up in his car and he runs over to the swing to talk to Sylvia. And he goes, "Hey, Sylvia, I want you to have the first ride in this car." And then he literally wraps his arms around her, pulls her off the swing, and then drags her back to his car. Just ridiculous. And David's looking at all of this, and he's like, what is going on? So Jack gets Sylvia loaded up into the car, into the, passenger seat, I guess. And then he's driving off, right? And he's driving back down the street, and he drives past Mary, who's just sitting in the front lawn of the house next to the street. She's just sitting there crying. And I'm like, girl, there's a better place for you to go do this. Like, why are you out in the front lawn of the house next to the street just crying? Go inside or something. Like, what? So Jack drives by and Mary sees him and he like turns and like smiles at her and just waves like, hey, what's up? So Mary sees him driving by with Sylvia in the car, and obviously she's feeling very sad about this, right? And then that's how this whole sort of opening sequence ends. And then we cut to some subtitles talking about how the war is starting. And then we get this subtitle card that just says the word war in all caps, and it's on fire. And it actually looks so sick. And so it's the word war, and it's like fading into the background, and it's on fire, like I said. And so we jump to a military recruitment office or something, or I think the door says something like aviation examination station. And so I think it's people who are signing up to be pilots. They have to go and sign up, and then they also have to get like a physical exam, I'm assuming. And at this point, you've got these guys all sitting around a table filling out paperwork, and then there's a door in the background, and this door swings open, and you just see a bunch of guys who are butt naked back there being examined, I assume. And in my research for Wings, I learned that this was actually one of the first occurrences of nudity in film, one of the earliest in all of cinema history. So kind of cool, but also totally unnecessary to be there. Like, I don't know what point is this serving in the story. I don't think there is one, but it's there. So, we've got an asterisk here saying it's the first nudity in a film. So that's kind of cool. So Jack and David are sitting at the table and they're filling out their paperwork, and it's clear that they don't like each other because they both like Sylvia. So Jack's got a pen and he's like filling out his paperwork and he makes eye contact with David and they have like a little bit of a stare down kind of thing. I don't know. Just making it real obvious that they do not like each other. And then this other guy walks in and he is all dressed up. He's wearing like a nice suit. He's got a hat on. Looks like he's going to a business meeting or something. And he's saying he wants to sign up. And then the officer who's sort of running the show here tells him, all right, you got to sign these papers, write your name down. And so this guy who just walked in, he writes his name down and it's Herman Schwimpf. And the military officer, he's like, he sees this name and I'm assuming he sees the last name Schwimpf. They're about to go fight the Germans. And he goes, I don't want any Dutchman like you in the war. So just like overt racism. So the guy who just walks in and wants to sign up, he wants to prove that he is capable and wants to actually, go fight in this war. And so he like starts to take his clothes off, like take his suit jacket off. And the military guy thinks he's getting ready to fight. And so he stands up and, rolls up his sleeves, that kind of thing. And then Herman reveals like on his bicep, on the inside of his bicep, he's got an American flag tattoo there with the words Stars and Stripes Forever. And then also his arm, his bicep is just jiggling a lot while he's showing this tattoo off. It's jiggling like crazy. And I think what he's doing is he's shaking his arm to make his muscles shake, to make it look like the flag is waving. That's the only thing I can assume is going on here, but it looks real goofy. It's like those slow-mo videos that you can find where, muscles or anything like that are just shaking and jiggling. It's really silly. And then they see this tattoo and then just total 180 in tone. Everyone in the room is suddenly on this guy's side. They're like, oh my God, you're a true American. All right. They start clapping, they start celebrating. It's like, it's crazy. And it's a really goofy moment that sort of comes out of nowhere. And I eventually learned that this character, Herman Schwimpf, clearly here for comedic relief, right? And he's played by an actor named L. Brendel, who was a vaudeville comedian. And so we still do this kind of thing today in movies today where we have a known comedian acting in a, relatively serious movie where it's not just a straight comedy, but we have a known comedic actor there purely to be a comedian. And so that's what this guy is. He is a recurring character throughout the movie. He's in the entire movie, but just a funny character to have in this movie about World War One. So then we cut to Sylvia's room. She's at home and she's sitting at a desk and she's got a portrait of herself, a small portrait about a postage stamp size. And she's writing a message on the back of her portrait and she's writing, to David, with all my love, Sylvia. And just as she finishes writing this, Jack walks in. So they have a small little interaction and basically Jack's like, I'm leaving for training. And I was wondering if you could give me a picture of yourself so that I could take it with me when I go to war. Sylvia, out of the corner of her eye, kind of looks down at this picture that she was preparing for David and that she had put inside this little locket. She looks at it and then Jack sees it and Jack's like, oh, wow, I never would have thought that you would have already had this ready for me. Thanks. And he like picks it up and you can tell that Sylvia's like, oh, no, not for you, not for you. You can tell that she doesn't want him to take it, but also she doesn't have the heart to tell him, no, don't take that. It's not for you. Because at this point, I don't think Jack knows that Sylvia and David are a thing. And so I think he genuinely thinks he has a shot with Sylvia. And he's also just very naive. So he picks up this locket with Sylvia's picture in it and he just takes it. And then as he's leaving, David walks in. They have another standoff. And David is kind of upset to see Jack there because, Sylvia's his girl and like here's this other guy coming to see her. And like, so he's a little bit moody. He's a little bit upset. And they have this little standoff. And it's at this point where it becomes really obvious that they are different stereotypes of men. Jack is clearly the boyish hometown hero type, like all American. He's got a baby face. He's got dark hair, and then David is like the very serious not macho, but like the more mature looking person at the very least. You know, he does come from the wealthiest family in town, so it does kind of make sense. But yeah, they are just at opposite spectrums of like male stereotypes. So Jack leaves, and then we cut to a short scene of David and Sylvia in the garden or something like that. They're out basically having a picnic. And David's still being moody, and Sylvia's trying to console him. And she basically says, you know, Jack only has a picture. I let him have it because I was feeling sorry for him, but he only has a picture. You have my heart. And then they have a very dramatic kiss, like very intense. Like David dives in for that. So they kiss. And then in the next scene, we have Mary standing next to the shooting star, the car that she and Jack were working on. And then she sees off in the distance, she sees Jack getting his stuff loaded into another car. He's about to leave. And she gets really excited to see this guy that she has this major crush on, you know, about to leave for war. And she wants to say goodbye. And as Jack is about to get into the car and leave, he's like, gee, I almost forgot to say goodbye to Mary. And at this point, I'm like, man, you are such a jerk. Like, this girl, next door neighbor, clearly in love with you, and I think they have a pretty close relationship. She's just this afterthought for him, right? He's just not thinking of her at all. So he goes to see her, and he basically tells her, well, I'm on my way now, bye, and like tries to shake her hand and then leaves. And then Mary kind of beckons him back over, and she gives him this picture of her. And let me tell you, this picture of Mary is the goofiest looking picture I've ever seen of anyone. I don't know what's going on in this picture, but it looks like she's riding like a tiny tricycle or something like that. It's small. Like, this is a tricycle for like a 5-year-old, and Mary, this grown woman, is riding it or something. That's what it looks like to me. I can't tell what it is. I don't know if that was normal back then, like if they only made tricycles in one size, but this picture looks so goofy. I don't know if it's on purpose either. Like, I don't know if it's for comedic effect or not, trying to really emphasize the fact that Mary is not Sylvia. Like, Mary is not the elegant city girl that Sylvia is. And so they are trying to drive that point home with this goofy picture. I don't know if that was the intention or not, but I laughed out loud when I saw this picture. It looks so goofy is the only word I can come up with. So she gives him this picture, and he's like, gee, swell. And so he takes it, and then he turns to leave. And as he's walking away, like, the camera's following behind him on like a dolly shot. And I don't know why this shot in particular stood out to me so much, but it did. Like, this following shot, it was very dynamic, and I don't know, it just looked really, really good, honestly, for a movie this old. And so he's walking away, and then he turns around and calls back out to Mary, and he goes, you can use the shooting star while I'm gone. And then pauses for a second, and then he says, but watch out you don't bust her up. And I'm like, this freaking guy, he is being such a jerk to Mary, and he doesn't even know it. So I can't really fault him for it, because he's not trying to be a jerk. He's just clueless about how this girl feels about him. But, you know, he's obviously focused on the car, and he's like, you can drive the car, but don't bust up the car. I don't know. I feel bad. I feel a little bit bad for Mary at this point. So then next we go to David's house, where David is preparing to leave. He's just like standing in the middle of the room, and then his mom is standing like 15 feet away from him, and she's reading off this letter. I'm assuming she wrote this beforehand, because highly emotionally charged situation. Your son is going off to fight in a war. You might not be able to come up with the words in the moment. So that's probably what happened here. She just wrote the words down, but she's reading this out, and she's like reminding him to change his socks. And like, David looks like a 30-year-old man, and his mom is reminding him to change his socks, and that's just very silly. Maybe not so silly. I know some 30-year-old guys who could probably be reminded to change his socks. So actually, you know what? I take that back. David's mom is 100% justified in reminding her son to change his socks. And then his dad is also there, and his dad is in a wheelchair, and while he's sitting there, he looks evil. Like, he has this look on his face. He looks like Scrooge or something. He just has, I don't know, he just looks angry or something. But I don't think that's what he was actually feeling in the moment. I don't think he was actually angry. I think he's just stereotypical quiet man, doesn't talk about his feelings, keeps them repressed, stunted emotional expression. I think that's what's going on here, because it eventually becomes pretty clear that David's dad does love David and cares about him and wants him to be safe. I think he's just really worried, honestly. So then the butler comes in, says something to David. I'm assuming he's telling David, hey, it's time to go. And the mom sort of stumbles and falls over in shock, and she knocks the table over and spills a bunch of stuff on the floor. One of the things that gets spilled is this tiny little sort of teddy bear. It's like 3 inches tall, and David runs up to the table, starts picking things up, and he picks up this bear, and he's like, I didn't know you still had this tiny little bear of mine. His mom's like, yeah. She just nods. She's just like, yeah, I did. Like, why would I throw this away, basically? So David decides to hang on to it, so he keeps it. And then they go out to the entryway of the house. And this house is massive. Like, I know they said that David came from the wealthiest family in town, but this house is huge. Like, it's a mansion. The ceilings are like 20 feet high. And, his dog is out there. And obviously the dog is the first thing I noticed. Every time I watch a movie and there's a dog, I always notice the dog, because the dog is always my favorite character, no matter what. Without fail. Any movie, guaranteed. And so David starts saying his goodbyes, first to his mom. So he goes and hugs his mom, and his mom sort of drapes herself over his shoulders. Kind of like, I don't even know how to describe this. Like, imagine the cover of a romance novel where the woman is sort of the damsel in distress draped over like the big hero's shoulders. That's like what they're doing. And so David's mom is draped over his shoulders, and then they kiss like mouth to mouth, which is fine, but it's like just a split second longer than is comfortable. And it's very romantic. I don't know what it is about this scene, but it's like a strangely romantic kiss. And then David's dad sees that David is still holding this bear, and he goes, that little bear can't do much fighting for you. And David's like, you know what? I'm just going to take it with me for good luck. Then David's mom is like crying about this, and she goes, just make sure you bring it back to me. And he's like, yeah, okay. And then he leaves. So then we go to boot camp, where Jack and David are arriving at boot camp. There's a line, and they're all going through check-in. There's like a sergeant or, some officer sitting at a table getting everyone checked in. So Jack and David are in line. They both get checked in. And then Herman Schwimpf arrives. He goes up to the officer to check in, and then the officer sees Herman Schwimpf's name, and is also racist. Gives him pretty much the same treatment as the officer from the other scene in the sign-up room. And, Herman Schwimpf, he's like, I'll show you, I can fight just as well as anyone else. And so he does the same thing. He starts taking off his suit jacket, and then the officer thinks he's getting ready to fight. And so he just stands up and just punches Herman Schwimpf, knocks him to the ground with one punch, and starts yelling at him. And then Herman starts to show off his tattoo on his arm again. And he's like shaking his arm to make the flag wave and all that. Exact same thing happens here. Everyone's like, oh my God, he's a true American. They're all, helping him up, and they're like, yeah, let's go. I don't know. I don't know if this is going to be a recurring thing throughout the whole movie, but it's just funny. It puts a smile on my face. So then everyone starts to go through the training exercises. First up is like these spinning machines, where basically they have this metal sort of cockpit thing, similar to an airplane cockpit that they're going to be sitting inside of. And it's hooked up to this sort of like spinning apparatus. Like, if you remember those rides, I guess you would call them, that you could find at some amusement parks, or like sometimes they were in malls too, but you would strap in, like there was a belt that you would put around your waist, and you would stand inside this ring, and there's like 2 or 3 sort of concentric rings that were on pivots, and so they could rotate in all sorts of different directions. They would spin you around, spin you upside down, all sorts of stuff like that. It's like that. And so you've got the guys sitting in these cockpits getting spun around. Jack is totally fine with it. David's totally fine with it. And then Herman can't handle it though. He starts to get sick. He's like stumbling around, all of that. And then the next exercise that they have is shooting, where they're all shooting down range, and there's a little competition that goes on there. And then they start doing some fitness stuff. So like they're doing burpees essentially. They're doing like jumping jacks and then doing push-ups. Honestly, I think they legitimately were just doing burpees. While they're doing burpees, David's hat is kind of on the ground in front of him, and Jack is standing in front of him. He's in like the row right in front of him. Jack looks behind him and he notices that David's hat is on the ground. And so this guy, while he's doing his burpees, purposefully lands his feet on top of David's hat over and over and over again, just crushing his hat, just because he's immature and he just wants to be a jerk. And that all comes to a head in the next training exercise where they're all learning to box. So there's an instructor, they're all wearing boxing gloves, and the instructor's showing them all how to throw a punch. And then he calls up Herman to be like a demonstration partner. And so Herman goes up, and then Herman just starts getting the crap beaten out of him and gets knocked down again. Like literally, this guy is just here for comedic relief. So then the instructor tells everyone to pair up and spar with each other. And obviously, Jack and David end up sparring with each other. And they just start going at it. They are trying to knock each other out. They are going head to head, throwing hard punches, just legitimately fighting. It becomes clear that Jack is a much better fighter than David. David gets knocked down 2 or 3 times. He's getting bloodied. He's getting bruised. Jack is just a much better fighter. But David keeps getting up. Every time he gets knocked down, when the fight should be over, David is getting back up. And it's at this point that Jack begins to respect David. And I think David starts to respect Jack too, because they're both showing their fighting spirit. And Jack is basically like, man, you're really game for this, David. And David's like, yeah. And then they just immediately become best friends. Within 10 seconds, they are now the best of friends. So just classic male fashion. Guys just need to fight once and then they're best friends. So that's exactly what happens here. Meanwhile, back at home, Mary is reading the newspaper and she sees an ad in the paper looking for women who can drive. And obviously Mary, a little bit of a tomboy, helped Jack work on the Shooting Star. She knows how to drive, and so she sees this as an opportunity to join the war. I don't know if this is out of a desire to contribute to the war or if this is out of a desire to potentially see Jack again, but she decides to go and sign up for this job. And then back at the military base, Shvimf is outside with a hose, and I can't remember if this is a gasoline hose or if it's just a water hose and he's washing something down, but someone walks up to him to try to talk to him, and then Herman stands up and like salutes, but doesn't realize his other hand is still holding the hose, and so he accidentally sprays this guy. And then this guy just punches Herman out again. So this is like the 3rd time that Herman's been punched out in this movie. And Jack and David are in their tent. So they're bringing all their stuff into a tent. They start getting set up and they see that there's a 3rd guy sleeping on his cot in this tent. So they sit down and eventually this other guy wakes up and turns around and sees Jack and David. And they all smile at him. These 2 guys just give him the brightest smiles because they are new. They still have that enthusiasm of being a rookie. They haven't become jaded yet with the war, but they're smiling. They're introducing themselves to this guy. And this guy's being nice. He's like, hey, my name's White, Cadet White. And he's obviously the cool guy character. And this is the character that is played by Gary Cooper. He's much taller than Jack and David. He's got kind of tousled hair, kind of a rugged look to him, like very masculine, obviously supposed to be the cool guy. And so they're talking a little bit, and he sees that David is holding this little teddy bear. David's like, yeah, I brought it with me as a lucky charm. And Jack's like, yeah, don't a lot of people have lucky charms? And then Cadet White is like, yeah, lots of guys do. To his credit, he's not making fun of David or anything at all. He's just saying, yeah, lots of guys do. Except me. I don't have one. And at this point, I'm like, okay, this guy doesn't have a lucky charm. He's definitely dying for sure. And then he gets up to leave the tent. And as he's walking out, he turns around and he goes, luck or no luck, when your time comes, you're gonna get it. And then he gives like a 2-finger salute kind of thing and then turns and leaves. And that really solidified in my mind, yeah, this guy is definitely going to die. So then David asks Jack what his lucky charm is. And Jack says, it's a secret. And then I kid you not, Cadet White, who had just left to go do a training exercise. I think he said he had to go fly figure eights or something. He crashes his plane immediately, like within 3 or 4 minutes. He crashes his plane. The whole camp mobilizes to go see what happened. And Jack and David are like, should we go? Should we not go? They told us not to run out there if something happened. But before they can even decide what to do, there is an officer who comes to their tent and they're like, is this where Cadet White was staying? And Jack and David are like, yeah. And then this officer says, pack his stuff up. We have to get his stuff ready to send back home. So then Jack and David begin to pack up Cadet White's stuff. And then they find this picture that he had of, if I remember right, it's like an older woman. I don't know if it's his mom or his grandma, but it's got some writing on it. So like he definitely did have a lucky charm. He just didn't take it with him. And so he died. And then there also is this candy bar that Cadet White was eating while they were talking earlier. I don't know if this was a product placement thing or not, but they, like the way the movie was edited, they made a big deal out of this candy bar. He's very intentional when he pulls out this candy bar for the first time. He's like, he takes a bite of it, he's offering it to Jack and David, and then there's like a close-up of the candy bar on his bed. And I'm just thinking like, what is going on with this candy bar? So I think it might have been a product placement thing. I don't remember if it says Hershey's or something on there. It probably did. Honestly, this has to be some kind of product placement thing. But then they're packing up the rest of Cadet White's stuff. And then there's another officer who comes by and he's like, are you Jack and David? And they're like, yeah. And he's like, okay, you guys need to go report for flight training right now. And so Jack and David get suited up and they look at each other and they're excited because they're about to go fly. So now we have another time skip. Jack and David are now fully fledged fighter pilots. Schwimpf is now a mechanic, and we are at war. We are fully at war now. We have a montage of some dogfights showing that the United States is now fully engaged with Germany. And so it's the middle of the night, and Jack and David are asleep. And an officer comes around and he wakes up Jack, he wakes up David, and he tells them that they are on dawn patrol, that they need to wake up, they need to get ready to get up into the air and go and patrol. So they get up, they get dressed, they get into their uniforms, and they're told that on their patrol that they should look for this guy named Kellerman and his flying circus. I'm assuming this is a squadron of German fighters, and I guess Kellerman has a reputation for being like an aerial ace, essentially, like one of Germany's top pilots. So Jack and David are getting ready to take off, and one of them is like, I hope we meet some heinies. I don't really know what a heiny is, or I didn't know what a heiny was, so I had to look this up, and apparently it was a derogatory term for German soldiers in World War I. But I saw this title card come up, and it said, I hope we run into some heinies, and I'm like, what is he talking about? But I guess it's just a derogatory term for German soldiers in World War I. So Jack and David and some of the other pilots, they take off, and we get this really nice tracking shot of the planes taking off, and I'm assuming this is thanks to the new camera mounts that were invented for this movie, but we are flying right alongside one of the planes as it's lifting off, and it's just a very smooth, very dynamic shot. So once they're up in the air, they're on patrol, and wouldn't you know it, the Americans, they run into Kellerman and his flying circus. So obviously they engage and we get into this dogfight, right? And so we're seeing the pilots flying around, and remember, this movie, all of the flying in this movie is real. And so we are actually seeing real planes flying through the air. So the Americans and the Germans are fighting, and one of the American pilots gets shot down. So you see his plane sort of tumbling through the air, spiraling, and there's flames and smoke. And this was actually so cool because, you know, there weren't really any special effects back then. And so for the flames and the smoke, an artist literally had to go in and paint in flames and smoke on top of the footage. So obviously it's not real fire, it's not real smoke, but it looks really, really good. And this is a movie from 1927. Honestly, we should do more of this. Like, this looks so good. If you've got a good artist, this is amazing. And also with the plane tumbling through the air, I think they literally just had the pilot, the real life pilot, just do stunts, essentially. Like, guy is just going crazy up in the air, doing all of these maneuvers to make it look like he's falling out of the sky. So kudos to the pilots who did all of the stunt flying in this movie. I think David probably did some of his own flying. Richard Arlen, I think he did some of his own flying. I don't know if he did the stunt flying, but so whoever did the stunt flying, just hats off to you. Looked incredible. So back to the dogfight, David gets targeted by Kellerman himself. And so they're going back and forth. They're flying around, pulling evasive maneuvers, shooting at each other. And David's gun actually jams. And so he's, yanking on his gun, trying to get it freed up, trying to get it unjammed. Kellerman sees this, and there's a subtitle card that says, thankfully, these Knights of the Air still had chivalry. And so Kellerman sees that David's gun is jammed and that he can't fight back. And he smiles and salutes and then flies off, just disengages from the fight because he doesn't want to shoot down David, who's currently helpless with a jammed gun. I don't know if this kind of stuff happens today in modern warfare. I feel like it doesn't. I feel like we don't hear that much about stuff like that happening where two people are in combat and then they disengage because one of them cannot fight anymore. It probably happens case by case, but I personally have never really heard of that happening. Then we get another subtitle card, and this one says, meanwhile, Jack, separated from the rest, finds two Fokkers on his tail. Now, I don't know what a Fokker is. I'm assuming it's slang, another slang term for German soldiers, but I'm not entirely sure. Hey, this is Jesse from the future. I'm just butting in here to say that a Fokker is actually a specific model of airplane from World War I. So when they say that Jack finds two Fokkers on his tail, they're just referring to the two German planes. Anyway, back to the show. So then Jack's plane gets shot up and begins to leak oil. And he actually has to make a crash landing. So he lands in this field and he crawls out of his plane and he's still getting shot at. The German pilots are still doing circles around him, trying to shoot at him, and he's crawling along the ground trying to avoid getting shot up, which he does successfully. He does not get shot and he manages to escape, and he finds his way into a trench. And it turns out that this trench that Jack finds his way into is actually a British trench full of British soldiers. So a British officer comes to meet Jack and he's like, let's have a drink. That's the first thing that he says to Jack. He's like, you know what you need? You need a shot of alcohol. And so I'm assuming that's what they go off and do. They go off and drink. And then next thing you know, we have another time skip. Now at this point, Mary has become an ambulance driver with the army. And so she's driving around, she's helping soldiers, and there's a scene where this soldier gets hurt or falls over. No, actually, you know what? Mary runs into this guy. Now I remember. So Mary's driving through this base or camp or whatever, and she actually hits a guy, knocks him over, and he falls on the ground and he's fine, but he looks up and he sees that Mary, he sees this attractive woman is driving this ambulance. And so he's like, oh, you know what? I'm going to pretend I'm more hurt than I actually am so that she can come and help me. And it works. So Mary comes out of the car and she goes up to this soldier and then basically starts spooning him or holding him. And he's having the time of his life. But then an officer comes and basically tells everyone to get back to work. And so he just hops right back up on his feet and runs off. And Mary kind of looks at him and she's kind of like, what just happened? So then we cut to a German camp and we are told that they have a Gotha. I think that's how you pronounce it, Gotha, Gotha. At this point, I didn't know what a Gotha was, but the German army essentially gets orders to go and destroy the nearby town of Mervale. So then we go to Mervale and we see that this town is currently housing an entire battalion, essentially. I don't know how big a battalion is, but there's a lot of guys here. And it turns out that a lot of the soldiers here have been struck with the flu. And so Mary has come to this town And she's the one helping them all. She's a nurse, essentially. She's helping all of the soldiers who have the flu. And then we see like a crowd of soldiers. They're gathered around like this makeshift stage. And there's someone on this stage dancing and waving like a handkerchief around. I don't know if this is Herman Schwimp or not. I think it is, but I'm not entirely sure. But basically just putting on a show. And then Jack is sitting there playing the trombone. And then someone gets like a radio message or a phone call or something. And we don't get to hear the phone call, but I'm assuming they're getting told that they have intel that the Germans are coming to attack Mervale. And so he raises the alarm, tells everyone like, hey, we got to get ready. The Germans are coming. And Jack and David run off and get ready to get up in their planes. At this point, it's revealed to us what a Gotha is. It looks like it is just a big German plane. So there's like 3 guys in this plane piloting it. One of them is flying it, and I think there's a couple of gunners. But this Gotha and 2 other fighters, they take off and they fly towards Mervale. And then they see Mervale on the ground. Meanwhile, all of the American soldiers on the ground, they begin to take cover. So they're all running inside of the houses, running into the basements, just trying to find safety. And Mary, at this point, I guess she didn't get the memo. She's just driving around in her car and she's wondering, where is everybody? Because from her point of view, this town looks abandoned. And so she's driving through town, and then the Germans start dropping bombs. So buildings are starting to get blown up and demolished. Mary sees this happening. She takes cover under her car. Buildings are collapsing left and right. And actually, part of a building, I think it's like a spire or something from a church or just, one of the buildings, falls on top of her car. But she's underneath, so she's safe. The car is able to protect her from the falling debris. Meanwhile, up in the air, Jack and David are beginning to engage the Germans. So Jack targets the Gotha. David takes on the 2 fighters. David is able to shoot down one of the fighters. Then I think the other one runs away. And then Jack is just harassing the Gotha. So big plane, can't maneuver as well as Jack's tiny little fighter. And so he's just going crazy. He's pulling off all of these cool moves, diving in and out, and basically he takes out all of the crew. He's able to shoot all of the crew out of this plane, essentially. So the Gotha crashes, and then the guys on the ground, they look up and see this battle going on, and they're like, look, it's the shooting star, because Jack had actually painted a shooting star on his plane and had become known as the shooting star in the army. So Mary hears these guys talking about the shooting star, realizes it's Jack, and then she just goes crazy. She's so happy. So after this dogfight, we go to France, I think, and Jack and David are receiving medals of commendation from France. For some reason, I didn't think countries could give medals of decoration to soldiers from other countries, but I guess that's what's going on here. Anyway, after this medal ceremony, we get an intermission. Now, this movie's not terribly long. It's only 2 hours and some change, but we do get an intermission, and I am fully in support of this. More movies should have intermissions, not just the super long ones. But this intermission was only like 3 minutes long, and I'm not sure if it was longer when this movie was showing in theaters. I bet it was just for later DVD releases that it was such a short intermission. But yeah, it just shows intermission on the screen for like 3 minutes, and then we're right back into it. So once we're back, we are now on shore leave. Jack and David and the rest of the Americans are in Paris now, and they're riding through the Champs-Élysées, or at least what looks like it, because there's the Arc de Triomphe in the background. So I'm assuming this is the Champs-Élysées, and everyone's celebrating, everyone's partying, and then you start to see officers going around delivering messages that leave has been canceled and that everyone is being recalled for what they're calling the big push. Mary sees a crowd talking about the shooting star. They're standing outside of a building and there's a shooting star logo. And Mary gets excited because, again, she has the opportunity to meet up with Jack. She approaches a couple of officers who are talking, and she gets a letter from one of them, and it's the notice of the leave being canceled and soldiers being recalled. And it has a list of names on it. On the list of names, there is Jack and David. And Jack, apparently his real name is John, and this is the very first time it's ever being talked about. I guess it kind of makes sense. Like, Jack can be a nickname for John, but also, like, there definitely are people who are just named Jack. So Yeah, it's just revealed that Jack's real name is John. And then one of the other soldiers tells Mary that Jack and the rest of the crew got into a fight and then they went to the Folies Bergère. So Mary goes to the Folies Bergère, and here is Jack. So Jack is in this place. And if you don't know what this place is, my understanding is that it's kind of like a cabaret club. So there's a lot of alcohol, there's a lot of men and women talking to each other, flirting, stuff like that. And Jack is here and he is getting just completely wasted, just out of his mind drunk. Apparently, this was genuine. The actor who plays Jack, Buddy Rogers, I think he was 21 at the time of filming. And this was the first time he had ever had alcohol. And so when you see Jack being absolutely hammered in this scene, it really is Buddy Rogers being hammered in real life. So Jack is sitting at a table with a couple other guys and some girls, and one of the guys is trying to refill everyone's drinks, but he's way too drunk, and so he ends up just spilling it all over the table, and it's just making a complete mess. So Mary's watching this happen, and she sees the boys drunk and flirting with the other girls. And so she approaches and she tries to talk to Jack, but Jack is just way too blasted to even understand what is going on. So he's just completely zonked out, does not realize that it's Mary, barely even registers that someone's trying to talk to him. So he just kind of blows her off. And then some dude in like a kilt comes out and the entire crowd goes crazy for some reason. And I'm not entirely sure what this is about or who this guy is. I'm assuming he's some kind of entertainer and he's about to put on a show or something. But honestly, I have no idea what's happening. But the crowd starts rushing towards this guy and Mary kind of gets caught up in it. And so she gets pulled away from Jack and then she decides to just retreat to the bathroom and try to collect herself and calm herself down. Now, inside this bathroom, Mary's, looking at herself in the mirror, trying to clean herself up. And then there's this just old lady kind of sitting in the back corner watching Mary come in. I'm not sure what she's doing there. I'm not sure what her job is, but she's watching Mary come in and she can tell that Mary is upset. So she and Mary start talking and Mary tells this woman, or actually, I think the woman guesses it. The woman's like, this is about a man, isn't it? And Mary's like, yep. And so they start talking about what's going on. Then we just get like an actual makeover scene. So we've been doing makeover scenes in movies for like 100 years, I guess, because Mary literally just has a makeover scene. So this woman grabs her and pulls her into this back room where there's just an entire clothing rack worth of dresses. And she lets Mary borrow this really sparkly, like diamond encrusted dress. And so Mary, gets all dolled up and she goes back out to try to talk to Jack again. And meanwhile, Jack has been talking to this other woman for some time. And so now this other woman sees Mary coming over, trying to take Jack away from her, essentially. So then they start fighting a little bit, having some animosity there. And while all of this is happening, Jack only wants one thing, and it's disgusting. It's just bubbles. Like, he keeps seeing these bubbles from like the champagne floating through the air. He is full on hallucinating giant bubbles. And it is all he cares about. He's like, I don't care who I go with. I don't care where I go. I just want more bubbles. It's just like fever dream of a scene. So then Jack turns and looks at Mary and he sees Mary wearing this new dress with all the diamonds and the sparkles on it, and it blows his mind. He's like, oh my God, your dress is so sparkly. And he sees bubbles floating through the air and all this stuff. And so he decides to go with Mary. So Mary gets Jack and they go back to his hotel. And Mary's trying to get him into his hotel room and trying to get him to lie down in bed. And he's just wasted. So he hugs her at some point, but he still sees these bubbles floating everywhere. And so he gets distracted by them. Eventually, Mary does get him to lie down in bed and he basically passes out. Meanwhile, there's all these military guys outside, like in the hotel in the hallways, rounding up all the soldiers. So they're going room to room, collecting all of the soldiers and getting them to report back to the war. And then Mary eventually finds Jack's locket. And before she opens it, she thinks it's going to be her picture inside. So she's like envisioning that goofy photo from before with her riding the tricycle. So then she opens up the locket, but of course it's not her picture inside, it's Sylvia. And so at this point, Mary is heartbroken and she actually gets pretty upset. She crumples up the letter that was talking about recalling all of the soldiers to the war. And it looks like she's actually contemplating hiding this letter or throwing this letter away so that Jack doesn't realize that he's supposed to go back to the war. I don't know if that's what's going on or what, but she does eventually have a change of heart. She uncrumples the letter and she leaves it for Jack. Then she goes behind a screen and then starts to change back into her uniform. She's trying to change out of this dress and change back into her military uniform. But it's just the worst timing ever because those military guys who are rounding up all of the soldiers, they come into Jack's room right as she's getting dressed. And it's like this really tall, kind of dopey guy, and then this shorter, sort of slimy, skeevy looking guy. And the tall guy is just, his mind is blown by seeing this woman getting dressed. And then the shorter guy, he's like being a real creep, trying to steal glances at Mary. But he and the tall guy eventually turn around and have Mary get dressed. And then they realize that Mary actually is in the military as well. And so the shorter guy, I think he's an officer of some kind, basically tells Mary, this is completely inappropriate for a soldier. You're going back home. And so I guess she just immediately gets discharged from the army. So now we get a scene of all of the soldiers marching back to war or back to camp, whatever. They're all just like marching along this road. And David and Jack are in like a tent or like in a little, makeshift building kind of thing. And David asks Jack to take his decoration, his medal, back to his mom. And he says that he has a hunch that he's not making it back today, that he's not going to survive. And Jack pauses for a second and then just smiles and laughs it off. And he's like, oh, just stop that, you silly goose. Then he picks up a newspaper and Jack's reading this newspaper and he sees an article in there talking about how Mary Preston has resigned from the U.S. Army. And so it's at this moment that he realizes that maybe Mary has been in France or in Europe at least. But then he's confused about her resigning because he's like, she's not the type of girl to quit anything. And so he's confused about this. But there's a third guy in this tent with them and he tells Jack, he's like, oh, in Paris, a lot of girls probably fooled around a lot. And so your Mary probably did that and she probably got in trouble. And Jack gets mad about this. And David, seeing Jack's reaction, asks him if he's in love with Mary. And it's at this point that Jack reveals to David and just tells him straight up that he's in love with Sylvia. And then Jack actually says that he thinks Sylvia loves him back because he got this locket from Sylvia. He doesn't realize that it was originally for David, but he thinks Sylvia gave him this photo, and so he thinks that Sylvia loves him back. David, meanwhile, is reading a letter that he got from Sylvia. Sylvia mailed him a letter, basically just straight up telling him, I don't love Jack, but I think Jack thinks that I do. And she's like, I feel so bad for him, but like, David, I'm in love with you. And so David knows the truth. But at this point, David and Jack are such good friends. There's such a strong bromance between the two of them that David can't reveal this to Jack. He doesn't have the heart to reveal this to Jack. And so Jack is taking the locket out of his shirt and he's like, David, you asked me about my lucky charm earlier. Well, I'll tell you now because it seems like the right thing to do. I have this photo of Sylvia that she gave me before I left. This is my lucky charm. And something happens and then Jack ends up dropping the locket on the floor and the photo of Sylvia falls out of the locket. David picks up the photo of Sylvia off of the floor, sees the message on the back, and in a total bro move, says, "Hey, Jack, give me the locket. I'll put this photo back in for you," because he doesn't want Jack to see the message on the back of the photo. He doesn't want Jack's illusion of Sylvia being in love with him to be broken, not in the middle of the war at least. Like, he wants to try to save Jack's feelings. Jack essentially says, "No, I don't want anyone touching this locket except for me." And David's like, "No, no, no, I insist. Please let me do this for you." And Jack just is so stubborn. He continues to say no. And so David feels like he has no other choice. He ends up ripping up the photo of Sylvia so that Jack doesn't see the message on the back. Jack doesn't know this, of course, so Jack just thinks David's being a huge jerk. And so they, get into it a little bit. They get mad at each other, or at least Jack gets mad at David. David knows the truth behind all of this, so he has no ill will towards Jack, but Jack doesn't know what's going on. He just thinks David's being a jerk, and so he gets mad. But then they're called to get in their planes and take off to go fight this battle. Throughout the movie, every time that they took off in their planes, they had this routine where David would look over at Jack and ask him, "Hey, Jack, all set?" And then Jack would do like a hand motion and say, "Okay," and then they would take off. But this time, that doesn't happen. This time, David shouts out to Jack. He's like, "Hey, Jack, all set." And Jack just ignores him. So already an omen that something bad is going to happen. The ultimate omen, though, that something bad is going to happen is that when they leave to go get in their planes, David doesn't take his bear. And so he doesn't have his lucky charm. And so at this point, it's so obvious there is no way that David is surviving. So then we cut to the air where there is a German blimp and there are German soldiers in this blimp and they see some American soldiers on the ground. And I guess they relay the message to some soldiers on the ground. I don't fully remember how this happens, but basically a mortar gets fired and the Americans get hit by it. And then some random character dies and he has a name. His name is Red. And at this point, I had no clue who Red was. I don't remember this character at all. I have zero idea who Red is, but he's important enough to have a name, and he's important enough for the movie to make a big deal about him dying. So I have no idea. I have no clue who this is. But anyway, Red dies, and then we cut back to the air where Jack and David are in their planes, and they get flanked by some German pilots. And David decides to distract these German pilots. So he engages with them and draws them off of Jack, basically sacrificing himself to try to protect Jack. And so David just single-handedly takes out 2 German planes by himself, like real quick. He's just going crazy on these guys. And then there's 2 more German pilots who decide to retaliate against David. Meanwhile, Jack is flying his plane and he makes it all the way to the German balloons, the blimps, and he shoots them and blows them up. As they're blowing up, the German soldiers who are in like the little baskets hanging underneath, they jump out, they've got parachutes, and so they're parachuting down to the ground. And then in the movie, they land hard, like they smash into the ground essentially. So I don't know what those parachutes were doing. It doesn't seem like they were helping that much. But the German soldiers who were parachuting to escape just hit the ground hard. I don't know if that's how it always was, but also if those were real people doing those stunts, I hope they weren't hurt, because I'm not kidding when I say that they were hard landings. After he blows up the balloons, Jack then realizes that David is not with him anymore. He was so hyper-focused on getting to these blimps that he did not realize that David peeled off at some point. So then we cut back to David, who's still fighting with these 2 German planes, and David gets shot. So he gets shot, I think in the shoulder or in the leg or something. He gets shot somewhere and he starts to bleed. And he's trying to hold out, but he eventually does sort of pass out and his plane crashes into a lake. So the Germans are still following him, trying to shoot at him. And there's like some German infantry on the shore of the lake as well that are shooting at him because they see this American plane landing. David falls out of his plane, falls into the water, and begins to escape. At this point, he's awake, so he's trying to escape. So he runs into some reeds or some foliage, some bushes, something like that. and successfully does escape into the forest. Later that night, David is now sneaking around behind enemy lines. And so he's crouched, he's hiding behind trees and bushes and walls and stuff, sneaking around, just trying to survive. And Jack is back at base without David, and he's so distraught now because this was his bro. This was his best friend. Even though they were fighting, he's still so upset that David is not with him anymore. So then we see a German plane flying around the Allied camp, and Hermann Schwimpf is on a machine gun, and he's trying to shoot this plane down. The German pilot inside the plane drops a note to the ground, and the Americans get this note, open it up, and it's a note from the Germans saying that they've killed one of their pilots that was trying to evade capture. And of course, Jack thinks that this note is talking about David. Then for the next few scenes, we sort of switch between Jack, David, and the main Allied forces. The Allies are trying to lay torpedoes across the battlefield so that they can blow up a bunch of barbed wire barriers. And so we see some soldiers putting these torpedoes down on the battlefield and then climbing over the barbed wire to go somewhere else. And there's one soldier that just grabs the barbed wire with his bare hand and climbs over it. And I'm like, bro, what are you doing? Like, what are we doing here? I don't know. It works out for him though. So then we go back to the airbase, and Jack is about to get back in his plane, and he vows to get revenge for David. But before leaving, he grabs David's bear and takes it with him. So he is getting up into the air. Meanwhile, all of the infantry on the ground, they're just slowly walking across the battlefield with no sense of urgency whatsoever. And Germans are set up in bunkers and in trenches, and they're shooting at the Americans and the other allies, and people are going down, people are getting killed. And it's kind of weird. I don't know if this was poor direction of the extras who were playing the infantry, but people are falling over, getting shot, and the soldiers right next to them are just walking casually as if nothing is happening. So it's kind of weird, but just like lemmings jumping into a cavern, they're just marching to their doom. So then Jack flies off on his own, and he has a hunch. His intuition is telling him to go to the Mad River, which actually is in fact where David is and was. So he flies to this river, and he sees a bunch of German soldiers trying to cross a bridge. And then he just gets blinded by rage, dive bombs them and shoots them from his plane, takes out a whole bunch of them. A bunch of them jump into the water, fall into the water. Back in the main battlefield, there's a German soldier, I think, who's in a bunker just shooting at a bunch of enemies. And there's a tank that comes by, runs over his bunker, and it's one of those bunkers that's just like a metal dome over a hole in the ground. And so the tank just runs over this dome while the soldier's inside. So he gets crushed. And then there's a bunch of back and forth between the Americans and the Germans. Both sides are taking heavy losses. And honestly, this is a massive, massive battlefield. This is probably the biggest set piece in the whole film. Thousands of extras. And I actually don't even think that they were all just random extras. I think a lot of them were genuinely infantrymen from the U.S. Army. And it's just, it's a huge spectacle. Like filming something like this way back in the 1920s is just blowing my mind that they were able to do something like this. So then we cut back to David, and David is still trudging through the mud by the Mad River. He eventually comes across a German camp, and he sees a bunch of German planes, he sees a bunch of German soldiers and officers, and he just monitors them for a little while. And then he just sprints onto the German airfield, and he knocks out like a mechanic or something, jumps in a German plane and steals this plane. And all of the Germans, they see this happen. They start shooting at him. A couple of them get onto a machine gun trying to stop him. A couple of the pilots get in their own planes. They're trying to chase him. But David gets in this plane and he's able to steal it, and he takes off. And then once he's in the air, he does like a quick loop, and then he shoots at a German plane that's about to take off and kills the pilot. And that pilot falls out of the plane. I don't know if this pilot was Kellerman or not, but there were a bunch of people who came and got the body of this German pilot and carried it away, and they kind of made a big deal out of it. So I think maybe this might have been Kellerman. But anyway, David gets this plane, he steals it, and he flies up into the air. Meanwhile, the Germans on the main battlefield, they begin to retreat. So the Allies have routed them, and they are now retreating. And then Jack, after having killed some of those German soldiers, and now with the main German force retreating, he decides to turn around and start to head home. At the same time, David, in his stolen German plane, is also hoping to get back into Allied territory so he can get back home. And I think you can probably see where this is going. So Jack, on his way home, sees this German plane piloted by David, but he doesn't realize that it is David yet. He just sees this one German plane flying in the direction of Allied territory. And so Jack decides to chase this German plane and attack. And so he's chasing David. He still doesn't realize it's David. This entire time, David is waving his arms, calling out, trying to get Jack's attention. But they're in the sky. They're flying planes. You can't hear anything. You can barely see anything. And so Jack just never realizes that this is, in fact, David. And so he shoots him down. David gets shot. His plane crashes into a house in some village. And Jack comes down and lands his plane in this village as well. People are celebrating. They think Jack has just shot down this German fighter. Jack is happy. He thinks he's shot down a German fighter. He gets out of his plane. He walks over to the German plane and starts to peel off the Iron Cross logo on the tail fin of his plane. And meanwhile, people who were there where David's plane crashed, I think it's a couple of officers, they get his body and quickly realize, like, oh no, this is one of our own. This is David. So while Jack is peeling off this Iron Cross logo, someone comes to get him and tells him, hey, you should come see this. He doesn't have long to live. And so Jack goes inside the house where they had brought David's body, and he sees that it's David. And David is still alive, but just barely. And so Jack runs up to the table where David is lying and scoops him up in his arms, and he's holding him there. And honestly, this is the most romantic scene in the entire movie. This romance between Jack and David, this is the true love story of Wings. Jack is holding David in his arms. David is happy to see Jack, before he dies. Jack is devastated that he's just shot down his best friend. Last time they spoke, they were fighting, but they're able to reconcile in this moment. David is able to tell Jack that, hey man, it wasn't your fault. I don't blame you for this. And, Jack is like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. And then we get a really beautiful shot of the propeller of, I think, Jack's plane coming to a stop. And that symbolizes David's death. So after David passes away, there's like this random old guy who comes back to this house. And there was also this woman and child in the house when David crashed into it. And so I'm thinking that this guy is just coming home after a day of work to find a plane crashed into the side of his house. So I'm like, oh, this poor man coming home, there's a giant hole in the side of his house with a plane inside of it. But it turns out I don't think this is the homeowner. I think actually this is like the town doctor or something, because he's got this cart that they load David's body into. So I think he's either a doctor or mortician or something like that. But he's got this cart that they load David's body into. And then this cart is actually being pulled by a dog, which is that a normal thing from back then? I'm not sure. It's not a horse. It's not an ox or anything. Like, it's a dog. And it's not even a huge dog either. It's like just a regular dog. But when I saw this, I was thinking, you know what? This dog and then David's dog from the beginning of the movie, these are the first two dogs to win an Oscar. So a little bit later, we have another time skip. And Jack is now piecing together the pieces of Sylvia's picture that David had torn up. And so now he's seeing the message on the back of Sylvia's portrait to David. And he's realizing now that Sylvia never really loved him. She always loved David. And I think in his mind, he's probably realizing the lengths that David went to try to save his feelings, to try to save his heart from being broken. And then eventually, Jack and the rest of the American forces, they return home. And so Jack is back in his hometown now, and he's being hugely celebrated when he gets home. You know, small town hero, went off, became this ace pilot, famous. So he is just superstar status in his hometown now. There's also a shot of David's parents sitting together. I think they're looking out the window. And when I first saw this, I was like, do they know yet? Like, do they know that David is dead? Like, I don't know how it worked back then because, you know, now when a soldier dies, they send someone to the family's house to let them know and all that stuff. I don't know if that was still a thing back in World War I or not. So they're sitting by the window, and I'm not entirely sure if they know yet. And then Jack, even though everyone around him is cheering and celebrating, and he's got a parade in his name, essentially, he's still very sad because he knows that he lost his best friend in the war. And so eventually, Jack decides to go to David's house to see David's parents. And there's also something weird going on with Jack's hair in this scene. Like, there's a lot of, like, white or gray on the side of his head. I don't know if that was intentional to show that through his time in the military, he got so stressed out that his hair turned gray, but it's literally just like a stark white section of hair on the side of his head. Just a little bit weird. And as he's going into David's house, he sees a portrait of David, has some flashbacks and PTSD, probably. Then David's parents come out to see Jack, and they look livid. They look furious. I wasn't sure yet if they knew what had happened, but all I knew is that they looked mad. And so David's mom approaches Jack, and then Jack reaches into his pocket and pulls out David's bear and David's Medal of Commendation. He gives it to David's mom, and she's overcome with emotion. She says something like, I wanted to be mad at you, but I know it wasn't your fault, or something like that. And so at this point I was like, oh, okay, yeah, they definitely knew what happened. They knew what went down. They knew that Jack is the one who ultimately killed David. But they're able to look past that as he's coming home and returning David's things to them. At least the mom is. I don't know about the dad. But the mom is maybe not necessarily able to forgive, but able to understand that, like, of course, Jack didn't mean to do this. So then Jack leaves and he goes back to his house and he sees his car, the shooting star car, and then he also sees Mary there. They talk and Jack tries to come clean to Mary, I guess. He basically says, hey, when I was in Paris, I think I slept with some girl there in Paris. I'm not sure what happened. I got super drunk and I don't know what happened. I don't think he realizes that it was Mary at this point. And I think Mary does know. I mean, obviously Mary knows, but I don't think she reveals it to him. And she just listens to his story and she's just like, oh, okay. But then also at this point, I'm thinking, why would Jack care what Mary thinks? Because throughout the whole movie, he was not interested in Mary. Like, Sylvia was this girl that he was so in love with. He had zero interest in Mary. And so at this point, I'm like, why do you care what she thinks? But turns out that, I guess, through everything that happened, he started to realize what was right in front of him in the form of Mary. He started to realize, like, oh, maybe I do have feelings for this girl. And so they get in the car together and, you know, they basically start a relationship. And then they see a shooting star flying across the sky. There's a callback to the earlier part of the movie about, you know, what can you do when you see a shooting star? Oh, you can kiss the girl that you're in love with. And so they kiss. And then we immediately cut to a shot of Sylvia still sitting on that swing by herself, depressed, like full-blown depression. And like, I don't blame her, because this girl had this guy that she loved go off to war and then get killed. And so now she's all by herself. And she doesn't get a happy ending. she's just sat on the swing. And that's basically how the movie ends, is with Sylvia just depressed on the swing. And then Jack and Mary end up together. And then David's parents are depressed because their son just died. So you've got like the two sides of the same coin. You've got Jack probably going to suffer PTSD for the rest of his life. He does like quote unquote get the girl at the end, but then everyone else is sad because David died. And then the credits roll and that's it. So there's like the end, and then the credits come up. And a couple of things I noticed in the credits were that they credited every individual musician in the orchestra, which I thought was super cool. As someone who played in an orchestra growing up and played an instrument for 20 years, that was super cool to see every individual musician get their own credit in the final credits of the film. That was something I really appreciated. And then they had the credits for all of the pieces of music in the movie. So there were a lot of classical pieces in the movie. There was also a credit for the Star Spangled Banner itself, like the national anthem of America. So it's like, does that really need a credit? But I guess it does. You know, it's still a piece of music. But then it got me wondering if this movie counts as a jukebox musical because it's a bunch of existing compositions being used as the soundtrack for this movie. But I don't know. So that's how the movie ends. It's definitely a little bit of a bittersweet ending. A lot of people are going to have depression after this, which is understandable. It was World War I. It was the Great War. So it makes sense that not everyone is going to get a happy ending. So all in all, I really liked this movie, honestly. I think I'm going to give it a rating. I think I'm going to give every movie a rating. And I think what I'm probably going to do is I'm going to give every movie a rating out of 100, with 100 being this is one of the greatest movies of all time. Everyone should watch this. 0 being this was a terrible movie that never should have been made. And then a 50, I think, is just going to be I had no strong feelings for this movie one way or the other. I didn't hate it. I didn't overly enjoy it. It was just a movie. So for Wings, I genuinely enjoyed this movie. I enjoyed it a lot more than I actually thought I was going to. I was a bit nervous with how old the movie was, being almost 100 years old. I was really nervous that I was going to be too disconnected from the era. I was going to be too disconnected from the filmmaking techniques, but that was not the case. I very quickly got used to the silent film aspect of Wings, and honestly, the filmmaking was very, very good. Technically and artistically, I thought it was very good. The story holds up. I think it's a story that you can still watch today, and it's not going to feel super dated other than, you know, the time literally being World War I. I think the underlying story, which is the bromance between Jack and David, and the sort of love triangle aspect of Mary being in there and Sylvia being, honestly, kind of a love square, love parallelogram. I don't know. That's still how we make movies today. So it's not that different from what we have now. And technically speaking, you know, having the real planes, the real pilots flying them was incredible. The practical effects of having planes crash into the ground or into a building, the special effects of having the flames and the smoke painted in, all of it was very spectacular. I'm sure it was even more spectacular at the time, but it really does hold up even today, in my opinion. So I really enjoyed this much more than I expected going into it. So I think I'm going to give this like a 65 out of 100. So above average. I have a favorable view of it. I think it's definitely worth a watch if you are someone who can get over black and white and silent film stuff. I think if you can look past that, there is quite an enjoyable movie to be seen here. So that's a wrap for Wings. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Thank you so much for listening, and I hope I will have you back for the next episode where we will be watching The Broadway Melody from 1929, the second movie to ever win the Oscar for Best Picture. And here's the synopsis. The vaudeville act of Harriet and Queenie Mahoney comes to Broadway, where their friend Eddie Kearns needs them for his number in one of Francis Zanfield's shows. When Eddie meets Queenie, he soon falls in love with her, but she is already being courted by Jock Warrener, a member of New York high society. Queenie eventually recognizes that, to Jock, she's nothing more than a toy, and that Eddie is in love with her. So again, thank you so much for listening. I hope you enjoyed it, and I hope to have you back in the next episode.